Good morning and welcome to our last session of the Soil Health webinar series. Our topic today is programs and funding to support soil health practices. So I have a question for you for the chat. After being here for 8 weeks talking with us about different kinds of soil health topics and management issues, are there any new to you practices that you're going to try this year or that you're specifically interested in trying in the future, maybe not this year? Our speakers today, we're going to be talking about programs and funding, as I mentioned, and we've got 3 speakers that are going to go through some funding opportunities and talk about how those work, and then we'll get to your questions about any and all of these things at the very end. So we've got Eric Schwab from NRCS, Mike Thompson from Indigo Ag, and Terry Mesher from the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And it's going to be a really great program this morning. We're going to start off with Eric Schwab. So thanks, Eric, for being here. And I will stop sharing and hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mary. As she said, my name is Eric Schwab. Let me get share my screen. I am the, if I'm good, let me know.
We can see it, Eric.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. So I'm going to talk to you about NRCS and some of the opportunities for funding opportunities for producers to implement soil health. So as you may know, NRCS, or the Old Soil Conservation Service, has been around a long time. You know, we're one of the few New Deal programs back from, President Roosevelt and some of the response to the Great Depression, agencies that are still around. And we, with many of our partners, the conservation districts, the Ohio Department of Ag, we implement conservation systems as part of a really specific process called the conservation planning process. And this, although many of our programs and stuff have changed through the years, this process that is fundamental has really not changed that much through the years. So it's a process, it's a 9-step process where we evaluate, and it's a 9-step process kind of in 3 phases. The first phase is, we evaluate your operation as a producer, determine your objectives, look at your farm, identify resource concerns, and then we help you in phase 2, try to make a decision, formulate different alternatives, because there's going to be different ways to get there. Look at funding opportunities within NRCS to help you make a decision. And the last phase is implementing your plan and maybe capturing some of those payments. So in the end, we're going to offer a system of practices to address identified resource concerns that meet the needs of your land, but also meet your needs as a producer. And some of these practices, if you're an eligible producer, there's some eligibility requirements that we have to implement as part of the Farm Bill. And if it's on eligible land, not all land maybe is eligible, there'll be an opportunity for you to be evaluated and ranked for possible funding. So you guys all know from this long series on soil health, all the benefits, and I'm not going to go through that, but I just wanted to point out, we at NRCS define soil health as the ability for a soil to function, and function as a living organism, as a living system that not only sustains your crops but also sustains you as a producer. And we look at soil health in terms of the 4 fundamentals. And when we're evaluating your operation, we're going to look at those, maximizing the cover, protecting the cover, maximizing diversity, maintaining a living root, and minimizing disturbance. And that's how we, in the planning process, will help you thinking about those 4 fundamentals, those 4 principles. That's how we'll help you implement those practices to shore up those 4 fundamentals. So when we think about the kind of the tools in our toolbox, the practices and enhancements that we have for possibility for funding on cropland, we're thinking about conservation crop rotation. That's going to provide that diversity, give that cover. The residue management, that's going to reduce disturbance, no-till and reduced tillage, provide some of that armor. Nutrient management is a big part of what we do in terms of some of the chemical disturbances that can happen. And we want to make sure that the needed nutrients are available for plant growth and your production. Cover crops offer a lot of value in terms of those 4 principles. We do amending soil properties with gypsum in terms of some of that aggregate stability on some of our challenging soils in Ohio. Controlled traffic, reducing, the disturbance caused by the wheels of your passes. Pasture and hayland planting in terms of maybe incorporating some more perennials into your system, and pest management. So let's think about the funding opportunities. That's kind of the planning and the type of practices. So within NRCS, we have multiple funding programs. I'm going to talk about 2 of our our flagship programs that we implement soil health kind of on working lands, but it's not all of our programs. We do have other programs to establish wetlands, protect farmland protection easements. But I'm going to talk about EQIP, because we got to put an acronym on everything. It's the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and CSP, or the Conservation Stewardship Program. Both of these programs will help producers and provide financial assistance to implement soil health practices on their operation, but they both work kind of in a different way or have some differences. So when we think about the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or EQIP, the purpose of this program is to provide payments to assistants to implement practices like we talked about to treat resource concerns. Now, the contract lengths are from 1 to 10 years. Here in Ohio, we generally do a 3, 4, 5 year plan, depending on what all you are doing, to give you time to do it. The payments associated with those practices are 75 to 90% of the average cost of installing the practice. So, and it's not your cost, but it's the average cost. That we do that nationally, and it changes every year. In practices, some practices will be eligible if you're newly adopting within EQIP. We incentivize practices that you currently aren't doing. So they either have to be newly adopting practices, or, in a case like nutrient management, maybe you are grid sampling and variable rate, making your applications variable rate, but you would be eligible to maybe do deep placement of all your phosphorus. So that'd be an increased level of conservation. Conservation stewardship, on the other hand, is a little bit different. CSP, it helps producers maintain a high level of conservation, and also incentivizes the implementation of new practices to address priority resource concerns. A CSP contract is 5 years, and you have the opportunity to re-enroll for an additional 5 years. CSP is a little bit different than EQIP. In EQIP, you get to offer the acres you want to. So if you want to focus on maybe your home farm, something close to the house, so you can keep a real close eye on it, that's okay. CSP, you enroll your entire operation that you have control over for the next 5 years. So you have to enroll it all. And the participants earn 2 different payments. There is a payment for your current conservation performance. So currently, right now in this farm bill, the payment associated for cropland is $7.50 per acre every year, the 5 years, if you're accepted within conservation stewardship. Plus, there's a bonus of $300 per year for every resource concerns that you are meeting at the time of application. This conservation performance payment oftentimes is greater than the additional payments associated with adopting new practices. Doesn't have to be, but it can be, and it often is. So conservation stewardship program is really for the producer that is more advanced in their soil health journey. It's for people that don't have as many resource concerns, that maybe are using a lot of practices. They'll meet a lot of those resource concerns coming in. They'll get a lot of that kind of bonus payment, and they just want to take it up another notch. So if we think about the kind of the payment rates between the two, and they're calculated a little bit different, because CSP, you're kind of adding on to an existing practice that you've already adopted. So the payment rates are just for that additionality, often cases within CSP. So for conservation crop rotation within EQIP, it's about a $10 payment to have a higher level of basically a high residue crop, whether that's wheat in your rotation, or CSP. It's a little calculated a little bit different. This payment or this practice is it's a little bit higher, so it's $10 to $20 for CSP. But as you can see, the other practices, the CSP is a little bit different. So for no-till, for EQIP, it's about 15. For CSP, it's about 4. Nutrient management, we do a lot of different things within EQIP, within nutrient management, all the way from a kind of a real basic, typical soil or kind of a field level soil sampling technique and blanket applications at that lower rate at $10 to, variable rate, zone and grid sampling schemes to incorporation of manure. So there's many options in some of these practices. Cover crops, we pay 30 to 40 within EQIP, and it's a little bit less for CSP. Gypsum is about $25 for EQIP, and controlled traffic is 14, and then to increase controlled traffic within CSP, it's 7.5. Our payment rates, you can search on Google for NRCS payment rates. They change every year. So there's a lot to consider. And again, I just covered kind of the infield management practices. There's also kind of edge of field, grass waterways, blind inlets, controlled drainage, other things that are that I didn't cover that again are all part of that soil health system that should be considered. So how does this work? A producer will contact their local NRCS office, and a conservation planner will have kind of that one-on-one consultation with you to kind of do that evaluation, understand where you want to go, and help you make that decision. We'll kind of lay out in that step 2, we'll kind of lay out various opportunities within EQIP or CSP, so you can consider what works best for you to meet your goals. And then if a decision is made, your conservation plan gets evaluated and ranked. Unfortunately, we get more people interested in our programs than we have dollars. So there's a ranking process. So generally the higher level of conservation or the more change that you're going to do ranks higher, and you're more likely to get funded. So that was just a really quick, brief overview of what we do at NRCS. If you have any questions, here's my contact information. Will be Q&A at the end, or reach out to your local NRCS office. We have, for our programs, we have what we call continuous signups, but usually once or twice a year we have what we call evaluation periods. Like right now in fiscal year 21, the evaluation period where we're ranking stuff for EQIP has already passed. So more than likely you'd be thinking about EQIP for fiscal year 22. CSP, we're coming up on a ranking period. So if you wanted to run out this afternoon on this rainy day and talk to us about CSP, you could, and perhaps could be evaluated yet this year. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Eric. Our next speaker is going to be Mike Thompson. He's going to talk about carbon trading, and Mike is with Indigo Ag.
All right. Thank you, Mary. All right. So we believe carbon farming could be transformative for farm economics. So we designed the Indigo Carbon Program to help growers capture the potential upside in as many dimensions as possible. So let's take a look. For a quick overview, the Indigo Carbon Program brings cutting-edge science and digital technologies to support you in adding beneficial farming practices. in order to generate carbon credits that adhere to high quality of standard. In addition to these high quality credits, our program is going to help improve the health of your soil and the value of your land over time. So to take a look back, when we started with the Indigo carbon program back in 2019, we began looking at other carbon markets that had been in play and to understand what had worked and what hadn't worked. One example we looked at was the Chicago Climate Exchange, which got off to a great start and then slowly fizzled away. Two of the key issues with that program that we noticed were there just were not enough rigorous standards for ag carbon credits at the time. And also there was a lack of sustained demand. So we set out to solve those problems. We teamed up with Climate Action Reserve and Vero, these third-party registries, to develop carbon accounting rules for agriculture. These organizations are two of the world's leading standard-setting bodies for carbon projects of all kinds, from forestry to industrial emissions and many more. And both have a high proven track record of offset quality. We expect that their stamp on these carbon credits will be much like the USDA organic stamp that you see in the grocery store. Buyers are willing to pay more because they see that stamp and gives them a confidence that it has met the rigorous standards. So we believe that these registry sign-offs are going to be important to the market because the market is already showing a growing willingness to pay for high quality credits. And as demand is on the rise, supply has been slow to catch up. With over 30% of the Fortune 500 companies making climate neutrality commitments, more and more are going to be looking to carbon offsets to be part of their plan to achieve these goals. The Boston Consulting Group, you see here in the middle on the bottom, is stating publicly that they're planning to pay $35 in the next few years and as much as $80 per credit by the end of the decade. So as the stakes get higher for these credits, the transparency and the quality that these registries provide will only become more important for the sale of ag carbon credits. So here's a snapshot of some of the companies that have already pre-ordered carbon credits from Indigo. You'll also notice the BCG group there in the center towards the bottom. That's the company that just from the previous slide stated $80 by the end of the decade. With this list alone, our first year carbon credits are sold out. So even with hundreds of farmers on track to get paid this year, we still have plenty of room for more to come into the program. So let's talk about how a grower can get paid. The most basic requirements of the program is for generating carbon is to implement a new practice into your operations. So planting cover crops, reducing tillage, diversifying crop rotation, rebalancing your inputs. These are the kind of the overlying categories, but under each one of these categories, there's many different things that we can look at, from, implementing other species of covers to the aggressiveness of the tillage to, when we look at balancing inputs, specifically nitrogen, we're focused there. So there's many different things that we can look at. In addition to the revenue from carbon credits, farmers, we know you see benefits from this as well. As we look at that, here's some of the benefits: increased water infiltration, which will lead to improved drought tolerance, improved weed management by keeping the ground covered, the biological life active, and the list goes on. So here's kind of the basic steps of the program. The steps in blue is what the grower takes with the program. The steps in gray are what Indigo takes care of. So sign up using our web platform, plan your carbon farming practices you want to implement, make those changes, add those practices into our platform. Then you'll have a digital harvest at the end of the year. From there, Indigo takes it over, and we do all the legwork to turn your management information into high quality carbon credits. The program is free. There's no purchase requirements whatsoever to participate in the Indigo carbon program. So step one, sign up carbon.indigoag.net. You go on there, have this web platform. You can map out your fields in here. You can map them out, draw them out, select them, upload them, where we can implement many software management software programs, shapefiles, whatever you have them in, and be able to pull them over into the system. So next step, make a plan. You have myself along with our agronomist here in Ohio to help you make that plan to implement practices or find practices that are going to work for your operation. We're going to meet you wherever you're at with your operation. So there's never going to be a time where we're going to say you have to do X, Y, and Z. It's meant to meet you wherever you're at in your operation. The decisions that the practices you implement are completely up to you. Then you implement those practices. It's like planting your carbon crop for the first time when you implement those practices. And once again, the decision of what you do, completely up to you. Next step, the digital harvest. So we think of it as a digital harvest rather than a physical harvest, because this is a time when you're going to share management records to show that the changes you've made, and this can be done through our carbon platform. The good news is the harvest season for carbon is in the winter months, so it shouldn't get in the way of farming the rest of the year. You see Morgan and Todd on the right. This is our customer success team. They're available to help with any questions you have as you're working through this management data upload. You can always chat with them. Once you finish that, Indigo takes it from there. So the payment structure looks like this. So you generate credits. Year one, we pay 50% of that credit. Year two, 20%, 10%, the remaining 3%. And that the reason is these companies that are buying these credits, they're looking for permanency of these credits. They want that carbon to remain in the soil long term. But as time goes on, these credits start to stack on top of themselves. So you get to year 2, as you can see here, you generate new credits. Those credits then stack on top of year 1. So 50% from year 2, 20% from year 1. That year 2 credit now is paid out for 5 years. Fast forward to year 5, same thing. Year 5's 50% stacked on the previous years. Year 5 is going to be paid out for 5 years. So that was a quick overview of the Indigo Carbon Program. Once again, to get started, carbon.indigoag.net. Create your free account, log in, map out your fields. You can map out 1, you can map out 100, however many you want to do of your own. So getting started is simple, free, flexible. They're registry issued carbon credits, making them a high quality carbon credit, increasing the value of those. And we're working with leading global brands as well as many more to come in the future. So thank you. Here is my contact information along with our agronomist contact, and we'll take any questions at the end.
Thank you, Mike, for sharing how Indigo Ag's carbon program operates. Of course, there are several companies that have carbon programs, and we appreciate Indigo Ag being willing to share with us today about how theirs works. And if you have questions about other places too, we'll see if we can put together a list of programs in our follow-up email for you. So our next speaker is Terry Mesher from the Ohio Department of Ag, and he's going to talk about the H2 Ohio program, and then we'll get to some of your questions.
All righty. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about H2 Ohio this morning. My name is Terry Mesher. I'm with the Ohio Department of Agriculture, the Division of Soil and Water Conservation. Governor DeWine in 2018, the summer of 2018, introduced and started to work towards funding for the H2 Ohio program. And really the objectives for the H2 Ohio program are to improve water quality, primarily initially focused within the Western Lake Erie Basin for ODA. The Lake Erie Basin has seen some significant algal blooms over the last many years, to the extent where Toledo had to shut down their water processing facility there for 3 or 4 days back in 2014. So what our goals are here and how we're planning on trying to improve the water quality is through 3 primary areas: better nutrient management, reduced erosion or better erosion management, and then also better water management. This program specifically isn't necessarily a soil health program, but I think there's several practices that are offered through the program that can be used to help build soil health as well. So the first thing that we look at within H2 Ohio, our water quality efforts for this first go round are focusing almost primarily or almost exclusively on the nutrient management. So we're using a nutrient management plan as the platform. Essentially, the way I look at it, that's the ticket to get in the door of the program. What we're looking for is a nutrient management plan that's consistent with the recommendations made in the Tri-State Fertilizer Guide, especially for nitrogen and phosphorus. Those are the two nutrients that we use in production agriculture that probably have the largest water quality impact. We're also going to be using current soil tests to develop those nutrient recommendations, and then they're going to be consistent with NRCS's nutrient management standard, the 590 guide. So essentially, all of the practices that we'll achieve through H2 Ohio have to be consistent with the nutrient management plan. Looking at some of our practices, this is a few of the practices. We also have others. But Manure Incorporation, what we're really trying to do with the Manure Incorporation is a couple things. We're trying to encourage the use of manure to replace commercial fertilizers to the extent possible, primarily focused there on the nitrogen portion of the manure. A lot of livestock producers have plenty of manure around nearby their facilities, typically have elevated phosphorus levels on the ground immediately surrounding their livestock production facilities. This is more of an effort to try to get producers to look at that manure as a nitrogen source, especially in the spring. Glenn Arnold has been using liquid manures to side dress corn in the spring for many years. This is one of the practices that we're focusing in on this practice or with this effort, as well as trying to get those manures applied to grounds with lower soil test values that could probably better utilize the nutrients coming in that manure. So the next practice we have are the conservation crop rotation choices. We have a forages option, which is essentially establishing a perennial forage, hay, orchard grass, alfalfa, any of those sort of things, as well as a small grains option. The small grains option would be any option, any small grain that is overwintering and would be taken all the way through to harvest of that grain. So wheat, barley, rye are all options for the small grains program within H2 Ohio. We also have overwintering cover crops. The overwintering cover crops have been very popular. We have nearly, I think it's over 400,000 acres signed up in the overwintering cover crops. And really what we're looking there is we're referencing NRCS's guidelines, Eric Schwab's shop as far as their Appendix A on the seeding requirements and the selection of the species and or mixes that we can use within H2 Ohio. So, when we look at H2 Ohio, when we look at our program efforts, those are probably the primary practices that we have related to improving soil health. Probably the biggest challenge that ODA's had with this is, a year ago, we were just starting to take applications, and we way underestimated the interest that we would have in the program. We were looking to have somewhere around 165,000 acres enrolled in the program. When we were finished with signups last March, we had over 1.1 million acres registered in the nutrient management plans. Some of our other practices, we had 500,000 acres enrolled in the variable rate application. We had 300,000 acres enrolled in the phosphorus placement practice. So we have, to say the least, ODA has been playing catch up to this program, the program interest, ever since we got it rolling. So, but looking at that, we're working on towards the implementation of year one practices. The year one practices began last fall and will continue through this late summer of 2021. And we have secured funding for the second year of practices. We will have be signing agreements with program participants in the next coming month for year two. If we look at where we're at, our focus area, like I said, to start with, is the Western Lake Erie Basin, and specifically looking at the Maumee River watershed. The 14 counties highlighted in gray here are our current program area. Right now, ODA is working with the DeWine administration to secure funding for the 2023 practices. So that'd be for crop year 2023 practices across the Maumee River watershed. And we're also working towards expanding this project area into the entirety, to cover the entirety of the Western Lake Erie Basin. So that would be an addition of 10 counties that you see highlighted in blue there. We're working with those. The executive budget that the DeWine administration released on February 1st includes funding for this expansion. So we're really excited about that. But we won't know what the final budget is until probably mid-June or the later part of June when the legislature gets ready to finalize that budget. We're looking at that expansion, as I said earlier. When we look past fiscal year 2022, we look into state fiscal years 2023 and beyond, we are looking at ways and looking at how we will be expanding the program statewide. Eventually, this program is meant to go statewide, but we determined that the efforts in the Western Lake Erie Basin were first and foremost to try to reduce the phosphorus loading coming out of that watershed. If we look at some of the payments are fairly competitive. I think they in many cases exceed the cost of the practice. But the way that we have built this program is we really wanted the producer, given the nutrient management plan, to be able to pick and choose the practices that they wanted to implement on that farm or in that field. We wanted it to be flexible and allow the producer the ability to adapt management on the given field. The challenge with that is between the sign up and the additional workload that we did not anticipate. We're trying to look at ways to streamline that process a little bit. So it is a work in progress. The H2 Ohio program is very young. We're not seasoned. Don't have a seasoned program like NRCS does with EQIP or CSP. So there will be changes made to this program as we move forward. But as we look over the next 2 years, the executive budget that the DeWine administration has released had nearly $60 million a year for each of the next 2 years dedicated to this program. So we're very excited about it. There's going to be a lot of things happening with H2 Ohio as we move forward. So that's a real brief overview of our program. I appreciate your time, and you can see my contact information on the slide. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers. Very good and succinct presentations to help us get an idea of the several programs. We really appreciate that. And we have had some questions come through and want to spend some time fielding those, and hopefully folks can get an even better idea of what's some of these questions. Appreciate those coming through. You continue to post those in the Q&A and I'll be able to see those. So, and continue to vote for your most wanted questions. So we have one. We have one from Greg that came through and it's been liked several times. I think it was asked during your session, Eric, but we'll go ahead and field it to everyone just for clarity. I know you all touched on this a little bit, but are you eligible if you're currently doing some of the practices like cover crops? So maybe just talk about that in general, but also how you could be involved with other practices, maybe if you're doing some.
Yeah, that's a very understandable question. And from our perspective, it's somewhat complicated, I guess. For EQIP, we incentivize the adoption of things that are new. So if you are wanting to do exactly what you have been doing for EQIP, the answer is no. You got to implement something new. You could increase the level of conservation. So say you're planting cereal rye and you want to go to a more sophisticated cover crop mix, that could be eligible within EQIP. Within CSP, because of that payment associated with your current system, you will not necessarily get paid specifically for doing that cover crop, but it works into that existing payment. So there is a way to capture that part. So from the NRCS perspective, it's kind of complicated. Yes and no.
Thanks, Eric. That's helpful. And then could the other two speakers just touch on that too? I think I know you both touched on it, but just I think that's one that comes up a lot. So just a short comment on that.
Yeah, this is Mike from Indigo. So with our program, I mean, we have a 2-year look back. So we can go back 2 years to when a practice change could have been implemented. But that list that I showed as far as cover cropping, reducing tillage, diversifying crop rotation, and rebalancing inputs, there's a list of many things. So even guys that have been doing this for a long time, typically there's still something we can find in there to get them qualified and be able to enroll in the carbon program.
Yeah, for H2 Ohio, we talked about this a lot, and our program is based on load reductions, nutrient reductions going into the water. But at the same time, starting this program out, we didn't have a baseline to go off of for the producers that we were enrolling in the program. So at this point in time, it hasn't been a requirement that it be something new. That will be, as we move forward in the coming years, that will be something that probably gets rolled into the program. Or as you graduate to, right now we're looking at a 3-year participation or a 3-year sign-up period for these folks that are enrolled. That'll be a requirement that they continue.
Great, thank you all. That's helpful clarifiers. So definitely appreciate that. We have one here for Mike. Is the deferred carbon credit money put in escrow so it is available to be paid out in case of solvency issues?
So with that, yeah, we're gonna. I mean, as far as going in escrow or what it's going into, I'm not sure on that financial side on the back end. But with our program, a grower can leave at any point in time. So if they decide to up and leave the program and go to another carbon program, they're forfeiting that future money that they would be receiving, but they do have that opportunity, I guess, to go to another program to either get paid more or anything like that. But with our program, you can continue to have upside in the market to capture, the rising demand and the rising value of those carbon credits along the way. So I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but yeah.
I think that's helpful. If there is a follow-up to that, they can, the participant can post that, but I think that gets at the question, so appreciate it. And do have a couple more actually for you, Mike, while you're on speaker there. How is the carbon measured? They know that it's measured by tons, but how do you come up with an amount of tons? Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, sure. So when farmers enroll in the program, their fields go into a random pool that we will do physical soil samples on, where we're measuring soil organic matter as well as bulk density on those fields. So they're randomly pulled, but then when a grower maps their fields out, there's all kinds of information that's pulled in on the backside. It's Surgo data, soil types, all that stuff, weather data, everything pulled in on the backside. When they go in and enter their management records into our platform, it all then goes into an algorithm that will then determine how much carbon they are sequestering. Then we use those soil samples that we physically take to kind of ground truth that and to tighten up and make the model more accurate.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that comment. And then I assume this is talking about multiple carbon programs, but is there a way, how does Indigo know that the same field isn't enrolled in more than one program? Is there documentation to help with that? Or yeah, that's the gist of the question there.
Okay. So when a grower signs up, we're kind of taking them at their word that they're not signed up in another program. There are some things where when they're in our platform, that they'll have to go through and field eligibility questions that they have to answer. And one of those questions is just stating you're not enrolled in another carbon program. So kind of an attestation right there that they're not enrolling these fields in other carbon programs. But other than that, today I don't know there's any other way to determine that with the ag carbon credit market being so new.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for fielding those.
Yep.
And then we do have a question here from Clint. If a grower is enrolled in H2 Ohio, would they still be able to enroll in EQIP? I think we can field that both directions, I guess. So Terry and Eric, if you have comments there.
Yeah, I'll field that question first, Eric. When we came up and we started to build the H2 Ohio program, we said early on that we weren't going to allow producers to double dip for the same practice or get paid twice for the same practice. So for folks that are enrolling in H2 Ohio, those acres, they sign an attestation, and we also do a little bit of background and make sure that those fields, those acres are not enrolled in EQIP or CSP. If they are receiving payments on that field or that farm, that parcel for EQIP and or CSP, then they're not eligible to enroll in H2 Ohio. When they come out of EQIP, when that federal contract is satisfied and there's no longer a federal contract on those H2 Ohio acres, then it is eligible for the H2 Ohio program payments again at that point in time.
And to follow up on that, from a producer's perspective, there is maybe a incentive to try to capture a lot of these program possibilities. And, from our perspective and what our planners encourage producers to think about is, there is a lot of these programs maybe are similar, but there is some differences, and it could be very problematic for a producer to be in multiple programs and to meet all the requirements. And we really, I think, encourage producers to try to do things kind of one at a time, that's part of, the evaluation process. A producer really needs to look at, there are multiple opportunities, and they should, consider what gets them in their journey, that suits their needs the best. And it may or may not be NRCS, it may be H2 Ohio or a carbon credit. And that's good. That's fine.
Great. Thank you both. And let me check, see if anything new has come through. Okay, we do have one here. Just in general, I guess this could be fielded to any of you, so any who want to answer, but what might be the best option for someone who's just starting out? What might be one of the first step practices they try? I guess that could be what you've seen be most popular or most successful, maybe would be the best way to phrase that. What do people have the most success with starting out in your program?
I would say growers that we've worked with, cereal rye is kind of the gateway into the cover cropping, and starting there and to get their feet wet with that, and then go that route, and eventually planting green into that standing cereal rye, especially with soybeans. So doing cereal rye ahead of soybeans is kind of the gateway that we look at.
Yeah, I'd kind of agree with that. Cereal rye before soybeans is, provides a good opportunity, with little risk. In addition to that, some of the nutrient management practices, thinking about, the 4 R's and, you can capture not only the payment maybe to offset some of those risks of trying something new, but, there's a lot of data. Ohio State has done an excellent job of having a lot of confidence in those recommendations. And we're very confident that a practice like nutrient management not only, is in your economic best interest, and that's kind of a real easy way to get some confidence, maybe receive a payment to offset some of those risks, but, to continue with, the idea of taking samples, making applications based on those 4 R's. And we'll often see people just continue right along even after the payment with those types of opportunities.
Thank you both for those comments. Mike, maybe you can speak to this. We do have a question surrounding just the idea of what is maybe from your perspective, what are corporations' interest in paying the farmer to do these carbon offsets instead of a different route? What I guess is the appeal of doing it this way for the corporation, and how that benefits the grower?
Sure. So they all have sustainability goals in play. And like I said, these climate neutrality commitments that they've made, and they're going to be looking for all types of carbon offsets to make that. But ag is one of the biggest places that we can generate a lot of increased carbon credits and carbon sequestration there. But they're also paying a voluntary tax today for carbon emissions, and they're looking to avoid a mandated tax like some of the other industries have faced over the in the past. So, you know, that they're trying to be proactive instead of reactive, but it all comes down to, I mean, it looks good for their company and their investors as well. And so they're looking to do whatever they can to be environmentally conscious, I guess, from that aspect.
Sure, thanks for that. And also to follow up on that, there's a question kind of hypothetical, so maybe you don't have a direct answer, but in the future, if the agriculture industry was expected to be carbon neutral, would there be credits available for growers themselves if they're enrolled with a program like Indigo's?
That is a great question, and I don't have an exact answer for that. That's
Fair enough.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. Appreciate that. I think we do have one question about payment schedules. I think this was perhaps for H2 Ohio. Terry, would you speak on what the payment schedule looks like for H2 Ohio, or is that on a once a year basis, or what does that look like?
The payment schedule is essentially, we're looking at all of the payments are handled through the local soil and water conservation district. It's something I neglected to mention earlier. So once if a producer is interested in H2 Ohio, they can go to their local soil and water conservation district and get signed up and start to ask the questions. The payment schedule, typically we're looking at making payments about twice a year. Once those practices are certified as complete. In general, most of the spring, late fall and spring practices can be certified once all the nutrient applications are completed in the spring. So probably that late May, June timeframe after corn has been side dressed. There's a lot of practices that can be certified as complete. And then the other time period would be late in the summer, early fall, when we look at some of our small grains in our Manure Incorporation, some of those practices, those could be certified late summer going into fall. And typically it's going to be about 2 practices a year, but that is at the discretion of the local soil and water conservation district. We have some of these soil and water conservation districts that have well over 300 participants, and just trying to manage some of the fiscal transactions that go along with the program. They're going to be limiting that to processing those payments in batches, but we anticipate 2 times a year.
Great, thank you for that clarification. I think that finishes all the active questions we have. Oh, it looks like we may have one more. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and finish up questions unless any of the speakers have any other follow-up comments, and I'll hand it back over to Mary. Thank you all very much for your sticking around to answer those.
Thanks, Bowden, and thanks to all of our speakers today for your willingness to take time with us and to share information and answer questions.